Hype Man, Raj Nation, the GOAT to market. From Hype HQ in Chicago, Illinois, Startup Hype Man presents the GOAT to Market Show. What's up, everyone? I am your host, Raj Nation, the founder and chief pitch artist of Startup Hype Man. This podcast is where we bring you founders, company leaders, and creatives who are building it, who are doing it, who have been there and done that. And they pull back the curtain on their go-to-market strategies so that you can build a venture that you love and become the GOAT of your industry. Want first listen on episodes before anyone else? Subscribe to our newsletter at startuphypeman.com. You will get alerts every Sunday morning when we release new episodes. All right, let's hear how today's guest is becoming the GOAT. Ladies and gentlemen, making his way to the microphone from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and currently residing in Naples, Florida. He is a multi-time author and an innovation historian and an esteemed marketer. Please welcome Jason Voiovich.
Raj, how the heck are you today?
I'm good. I'm running through 4-5 episode recordings in a single day.
Crazy.
And
don't
I'm
overdo it,
excited to
Don't
have
overdo.
you.
A classic innovator problem. You take on too much.
Well,
by the way, you do have the best intro in the podcast universe. I really think it is the best.
I very much appreciate that. Everybody listening, once again, he is Jason Voiovich, and he is coming on to the GOAT to Market show for the second time. Yes, we had him back in 2021 off the heels of the release of his first book titled Marketer in Chief, where he detailed every United States president through the lens of what if they were actually the CMO of the country. The book broke down how every president more or less pitched, marketed, and sold their version of the American dream. It's a fantastic read. I highly recommend you pick that up. If you have the slightest interest in history or politics or innovation, it is the perfect overlap of those three. And Jason's now on to his third book, because in between that, he released a follow-up book, which was called Booze, Babes, and the Little Black Dress, detailing the 1920s, the Roaring '20s, and how that shaped America through the lens of innovation. And now he's on to his third book, which is called Bullfrogs, Bingo, and the Little House on the Prairie. And it details the Great Depression and why the Great Depression is actually a great model for innovation. And today we're going to talk about some of the elements from that book, but through the lens of helping entrepreneurs, because there's so much innovation lessons we can learn as you build your ventures. So Jason, just right off the bat, once again, welcome. Why the Great Depression matters today? Just, high level overview. Why do you believe it matters today?
I think, I want to pull us all the way back to a quick opportunity I had back in 2007. We remember the Great Recession at that time. Terrible time, scary. Those of you listening who remember that, remember it very vividly. There was talk of the financial system collapsing. The whole deal was bad. And I had an opportunity to listen to historian David McCullough, God rest his soul. And he got up on stage at a really pivotal time. And I had always been interested in history. I always thought it was fascinating, but I really didn't connect it to my day-to-day job. I always thought that the job of an innovator was to look forward, not look backward. And, someone from the audience asked the question, well, gosh, Mr. McCullough, it's great. This has to be the worst possible time in American history. What would you say to that? And he said, are you kidding? This might not even crack the top 10 for worst possible times in United States history. He took us back to, before the Revolutionary War. He said, when we were in the Revolutionary War, we were very destined to lose. We walked through the Civil War and how bad that was. And he kind of ended on the Great Depression. He said, this isn't even close to the Great Depression. what it was, that was a decade's worth of people standing in bread lines, people wondering if our whole system was going to survive. And what was so really interesting to me about that was it changed my life. It changed my perspective that in order to really understand where we go from here, we need to understand how we got here. And if we don't, we risk kind of repeating history, repeating the bad parts, not repeating the good parts. So I felt like, obviously, the story about the 1930s was a follow-up to the story of the 1920s. But more than that, especially right now in this time of kind of chaos and negativity and challenges, I think the book is really well timed. I think it's going to help innovators really understand that the chaos creates opportunity and constraints are a good thing.
So when we think of that period of the 1930s, I feel like anyone who knows about American history, like almost you quite literally picture bread lines. You think of it in black and white because we only have photos of black and white. Right. And then you probably picture that in like a lone farmhouse in the middle of a dusty like field because you think of the Dust Bowl as well. Can you kind of challenge the notion of what the 1930s really was? Because it was that, but I know you believe it was so much more than just those 2-3 pictures we have in our head.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We have to shift our perspective, and that's really the core task of an innovator and an entrepreneur is to challenge the notion that we have in our head about a market or about a situation or about a person. And really, my pitch for the book to innovators is pretty simple. It really comes down to how did we get here? That's the question we need to answer. Whether we're going to talk about AI, political chaos, cultural drama, it doesn't really matter. We as innovators and we as Americans kind of find ourselves asking that sort of question again and again and again. And the challenge back to me is, well, learn from history. But gosh, have you read most history books? I love history, but they're dense and they're dry. You kind of feel like you're the one getting older. So if you say, well, I'm going to try watching TV, what a mess, kind of a red team, blue team cage match. You try to go to podcasts, kind of the new one. How many podcasts are out there? It's kind of a job of sifting the who's from the wahoos and the yahoos. So I don't think history should be a tale of just two opinions. We need to go kind of the story behind the story. We need to go past the Dust Bowl. We need to go past the bread lines. We need to get that out. What's interesting is color photography was invented in the 1930s. And we need to take a colorful view to the 1930s. So we need to understand how Midwest moms figured out how to repurpose cotton flour sacks and essentially create a new industry. We need to figure out why bullfrog farms became popular in the 1930s and what they said about the entrepreneurial spirit. And we need to take a look at how Scotch tape became the most indispensable product in our homes today. That and 21 stories about the 1930s, it will absolutely blow your mind on what the 1930s were and that bad times created the most surprising outcomes. This is kind of more like, I call it tapas history, more This American Life, a lot less college textbook. So as an entrepreneur, when you read this book, you're going to immediately begin to see opportunities and lessons that you can apply to your entrepreneurial venture today. That's my pitch for the book. That's why you should get it.
And that's what I really like is, as you think about the people who are listening to this show are aiming to build enduring products. And an example like Scotch tape, like how do you get a more enduring product than that? And it came from a rough time. And I think you often hear people say like bad times or what the greatest innovation comes from, but I don't think they really unpack it or really understand it to the level that you're bringing out, both in the book and through all your other works. And then, and also in this conversation today. So let's kind of talk through some of these stories. I feel like the best way for listeners to really embrace this philosophy is if we can just kind of unpack some of the specific stories you've uncovered from the era of the Great Depression. And by the way, the color photography thing, I'm like, man, why didn't they take any photos of those bread lines then?
It's crazy. You know, I'll say the kind of the color photography one is interesting since we brought it up. It's kind of a fourth example, and it's a really good one. What's cool about that is color photography was invented by two concert pianists. And sponsored by Kuhn Loeb and Company back in the day, gave them some of the initial financing, as well as Kodak. But it really came down to two guys, both named Leopold, by the way, who invented Kodachrome. And what was cool, the cool story is they worked through it. They finally got this to work. And we tend to remember, you mentioned like, hey, black and white photos. What was really cool, people remember the Hindenburg disaster, right? Where the airship kind of crashed people below it. Everyone's seen kind of the black and white newsreels and the black and white photos. One guy in the audience had Kodachrome film in his camera and took the picture in color. And you can see the difference. It is absolutely night and day when it comes to that. It's one of those crazy things you need to explain to little kids when they first start reading history or they learn about it in school, that like, was the world black and white before about 1940? Because they just don't get it. Like, when did the world turn color?
Yeah.
But what I thought was interesting is that story, and there are a lot of musicians and people who wouldn't consider themselves innovators. And throughout the book, it is mostly stories of people with no training, no background, who saw a problem and worked it. So all of the people listening who think, well, they're having imposter syndrome right now. Like, oh boy, I don't know if I have the skills, or I don't know if I have that. What the two Leopolds were interested in is they fell in love with the problem. They didn't fall in love with their solution. And they found a way to make it happen. Now, musicians tend to be really disciplined people in order to get good at it. Yeah, you have to be disciplined. It's one of those kind of gritty lessons that if you are disciplined and gritty, you can find a way to get it done. You don't have to be a photographic engineer. In fact, the people at Kodak couldn't figure it out and couldn't figure it out for years. It took two people from outside to do it. So, I mean, the lesson there is, hey, you don't have to have specific skills to disrupt an industry, but you do need to dive in. You do need to persist through that process. Funny enough, Richard Drew, the inventor of Scotch tape, who was employed by 3M, who talked his way into a job at 3M, by the way, was a banjo player, a stage banjo player. That was his deal. It was kind of lucky for all of us that his career didn't work out. And again, the same kind of keep at it. I mean, he had to try hundreds and hundreds of different combinations of adhesives on backing material to figure out which one was, the word for it is semi-sticky. If you've used a Post-it note, you know exactly what I'm talking about. He invented masking tape and magic tape, essentially the same idea. That you wanted something that would mask off an area. The first people to use it were people two-tone painting cars. Basically, if you tried to there was no tape back then. People really forget there was no tape. So imagine your life without tape. Imagine doing masking without tape. It really doesn't work. He was the one who came up with it. And wonder, well, why was it 3M? What was it about 3M that made it interesting? Well, 3M, as you know from back then, one of their first products for Minnesota mining and manufacturing was sandpaper.
Oh, those are the 3Ms, Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing?
Manufacturing. That's what that stands for. And that's what it was called back then. No one called it 3M.
Sure.
Up in the Two Harbors, Duluth area of Minnesota. That's where that's from. And they had, essentially their whole business was sandpaper. So, well, what is sandpaper fundamentally? It's a backing paper, little teeny rocks, and glue. That's what sandpaper is. So you have to glue the rocks to the backing paper. So 3M was really good at glue, and they had a whole portfolio full of glues. And some of them worked really well, and some of them were just god-awful. And they were god awful because when you put the abrasive material on the backing paper with some of those glues, they kind of came right off. They just didn't have enough adhesive. So they were kind of a little sticky, but not sticky enough. Richard Drew looked at that and said, I'm going to put that on the back of the backing paper just by itself so I can put it on and then I can take it off when I'm ready to take it off. So I want something just kind of semi-sticky. He was basically a college dropout. He spent one semester at the University of Minnesota in an engineering degree, quit, and talked his way into a job at 3M. And William McKnight, the CEO at the time, kind of the McKnight Foundation, that same guy, put him to work selling sandpaper door to door. So that was his first job. And he was the guy who noticed, I'm selling a lot of sandpaper, but they really hate it because they keep having to kind of sand off this paint. And what I think was interesting about not only are musicians gritty people, and this should be anyone who loves music or is just a really disciplined, like athletes tend to be really good at innovation as well because of the discipline. What I think musicians are really good at is noticing things that other people overlook and kind of vibing with an audience. If you're on stage and the audience kind of is with you, well, you're not going to get called back, right? I mean, musicians have that relationship with their audience that's kind of natural. They get it. That tends to lend itself really well to entrepreneurship because Richard Drew could sit in there and he really noticed, like, these guys are having a problem. Maybe I could do something a little different. And he was the one who basically invented the Pro Fab Lab at 3M. Basically, their culture of innovation, their culture of experimentation was born from that era and masking tape. It basically made 3M into a global company.
That's incredible. And I think what's so kind of, it comes back to what you were saying, which really is such an important entrepreneurial lesson, is it's really being obsessed with the problem. You have this person who's going door to door selling a product and recognizing it actually isn't very good and people don't really like it. And so that creates market opportunity. It's recognizing that, something can be done about it and then finding that solution that does exist for it.
I think it's one of the best lessons that we can learn is being observant, being gritty, not being obsessed with your skill level as it is today. When we think about, and there's a big difference between what you'd call kind of transformative innovation and incremental innovation. Once we get to the point where, okay, we're iterating on a type of tape, that's a very different skill set. That's a very much more of a research driven sort of skill set. Not that that's not valuable, but it's very different. Most of the stories in the book, and I take real pains to avoid stories in the book of Thomas Edison or Henry Ford or, these
like the obvious ones.
Yeah, the obvious ones and like the mythical ones who had huge labs and they had all these resources and they had like, oh, wow, I invented this really cool thing, but I had thousands of people and, millions of dollars in venture funding. That's not what this was during the Great Depression. Like even the Leopolds who invented color photography film certainly were in the position where they had a little bit of support from Kodak and from Cum Loeb, but it wasn't that much money. They were in a rented New York apartment sweating it out, going through different iteration after iteration. Yeah, they had a little money, but it wasn't like they had thousands of Kodak engineers helping them through this. This is all about the people just like you, just like me, just like the people listening who are like, hey, I'm a nobody right now, but I've got an idea, I see a problem, and I'm out there to go fix it. That's where most transformative innovation comes from. And I want to celebrate those stories, not the stories of like, hey, there's company X, Fortune 500, introduce the next Fortune 500 big thing. Like, hey, Apple introduces the iPhone. That's great. Well, what lesson can you learn from that as an entrepreneur? That you need Apple's brand name, you need Steve Jobs, you need thousands of engineers, you need Johnny Ive, you need a distribution channel with millions of people waiting on pins and needles to get your product. None of us have that. Mm-hmm. Like, we need to take lessons and stories from people who don't have those advantages, and how do they still make it work? And that's what this book celebrates. And I think that's the key lesson that's embedded in every one of these stories.
So much of this conversation is around the idea of innovation and looking at yourself not just as an entrepreneur, but as an innovator. And as Jason was mentioning, like Scotch tape and masking tape, like these were disruptive products. So if you're listening to this and you're like, I want to build that next enduring product, then you probably know even getting out of the gate in the first place and figuring out what to do, how to create that product and how to build the software behind it, like the effort it takes is grossly underestimated. And it really requires this combination of skill and experience. So what ends up happening is you get an offshore dev team and you never know like what you're really going to get with an offshore dev team. Or maybe you have the moonlighter who said they're good for it, but now they're ghosting. And then there's a lot of accelerators. They're great, but they'll teach you, not build for you. It just kind of feels like at the end of the day, everyone who can help either wants money or equity or both. And any wrong decision is going to put your launch at risk. Not anymore, because our friends at Code Launch are here to help you lift off. If you have not heard, if you're not familiar, Code Launch is the only equity-free accelerator plus pitch competition plus exposure platform, all wrapped into a venturetainment spectacle. If you get selected for Code Launch, you get free, yes, I said free, software development from top-tier development teams. Then you get to pitch and demo your product live on stage to hundreds of stakeholders, and you compete with other startups to secure an investment on the spot. It is truly one of a kind, and it's one of the best ways, if not the best way, to get your startup going, whether you're launching or whether you need to get traction on something you've already launched. When you make moves with Code Launch, you're closer to turning those not invites today into tomorrow's yacht invites, because there will be a party waiting for you when you build that enduring disruptive product. So if you want to join the likes of companies like Caracorder, Endora, Materia, Bioworks, and more, these are all companies who have lifted off through Code Launch's help. There's two ways you can go about this. You could go to codelaunch.com, or you could go to the special link that's in this episode's show notes. And that's a unique link specifically for fans and friends of Startup Hype Man and the Goat to Market show. That link, if you fill out your application through that link, what it's going to do is going to trigger on the back end, hey, they're in the Startup Hype Man and Goat to Market community. And that's going to advance your application to the top of the line. So you can cut the line and get your application reviewed first if you use the unique link that's in the show notes. Code Launch. We code, you launch, apply today. And today on the Goat to Market show, we're with innovation historian and multi-time author, Jason Voiovich. So Jason, as we kind of look at the approach you took in writing this book about the Great Depression, the sense I'm getting is like, we're looking back and we see people in history who did things. We see them as historical figures, but not as people. It feels like you're kind of going for the angle of like, who were they actually as people that got them to create the idea? Is that like a fair assessment?
Yeah, 100%. That's something that I credit my wife for more than anything else. She's my biggest fan and first reader of everything that I write. And she encourages me to really focus on who the people were. What was it that made them special? What was interesting about them? What struggle did they face? Because it's so easy at the end of the day to kind of look and backcast from like, oh, wow, here's this amazing innovation. And it was just inevitable that this person or these group of people would have come up with it. Nothing could be further from the truth. It's so important to understand these were real people with real lives that extended well beyond what they were trying to do here. And if we look into their personal lives a little bit and we really get to know them, what we find is that the innovation process isn't as mysterious as we thought it was. Lots of different people can be successful. There are a lot of different ways to be successful. And you don't need, like, yes, money helps. Yes, skills help. Yes, market opportunity helps. But really it comes down to, I see a problem and I'm going to try to find a way to fix it. It's a very human endeavor. It's our birthright as humans to be able to innovate. That is what separates us from most other creatures on this earth, is we have that gift. There is no special innovative person. All of us can do that. And I want to show in the book, yes, we'll talk about the innovation, but we talk about that Richard Drew was a banjo player. And what did that mean for him as an innovator? Most histories of Scotch tape and magic tape omit that because they're like, well, that wasn't relevant. It was sure relevant to him. He loved it. That was part of what made him him. That was part of what gave him joy in the world. How can we omit that and really think that we still understand how he came up with his ideas? We have to understand the people. And I think the more you understand the people, the more confidence it gives you that you can be an innovator. There are certain personality traits and different ideas that do that don't require Silicon Valley. They don't require connections. They don't require those things. They require a different set of skills.
And it really is, I think, bringing dimension to this, because anyone who becomes famous for whatever reason, I think we just look at them through the lens of their accomplishments, not through what led to those accomplishments. That's what I think is just very impressive in this process. So can you talk about how did you do that kind of research to figure out this information, right? I'm pretty sure if I Google search Richard Drew, I'm not going to find these detailed stories about, maybe now because of your book I will, but prior to that, I'm not going to find about the inner workings of his mind. I might just find that he was associated with a product.
I think what's interesting is this isn't the sort of thing you can get from a prompt. This isn't the sort of thing that you can get from a Wikipedia article. You might get a couple of details here and there, but what really, the real skill of a historian is primary source research. And here's what I mean by that. We need to get beyond the summaries that other people have written, and we need to get to that person's own words. What was going on in their life at that time. So really understanding, hey, the same week that he invented this, here's what happened in the news that day. What was he thinking about at that time? What was in the news? So reading the newspapers from Duluth on the days he was working on these inventions, actually looking at where were the body shops that he was going to on his sales route, and actually looking at how far did he have to walk from place to place to place. So you start to get an idea of how was he thinking about it. What's really cool also is if you go to 3M, they have a wonderful reference library that keeps all of those papers. They actually have his notes. You can actually just read his notes. A lot of them haven't been digitized, so you need to read what he said.
Brush up on your cryptography skills.
Yeah, well, it's even more than that. It's like you go through and you're reading his patent notes as he's going through developing these, and you see failure after failure after failure. And, okay, today I'm trying this. Okay, here's how it worked. Okay, that didn't work. I'm trying this. So often when we take a look at retrospective case studies of innovation, it looks so inevitable. And that's what's so disheartening to entrepreneurs, I think, that they look at that and they look at the invention of some really cool product and oh, but I'm struggling with mine. Mine must be doing something wrong. You are not. I can promise you, reading the notes from these innovators in their own hand or in, kind of their own records absolutely will show you that, this overnight success took years, sometimes decades. So I am more hopeful than ever. The more I read, the more I actually look beyond kind of the story behind the story. You get a kind of a deep sense of satisfaction and hope that, okay, yeah, these people were just like me. I got to push through it. I got to keep working at it. They did it. I can do it too. Quit reading the case studies and focus on what really happened during that time. And you'll be a lot better off. It kind of gets rid of imposter syndrome. It gets rid of a lot of those doubts, just to understand that other people struggled through the same things you are struggling through right now.
Now, all of that said, it wasn't called the Great Depression for no reason, right? There was 25% unemployment, which we have not touched anything close to that since. There was like widespread hunger and malnourishment, right? So putting a positive spin on that can be a little bit of a challenge, but really more my question is like, because you've written a book on the 20s, you now have a book on the 30s, from our own conversations, I know you plan to write one on the 40s. If you were to like define each decade with like a characteristic or a title, what's the 20s, what's the 30s, and what's the 40s? And you can answer that in whichever order of decades you want.
No, it's a really great question. When you take a look at the Roaring 20s, it wasn't called the Roaring 20s for nothing. It was a time of boundless possibility. And to me, it really feels a lot like the 2020s in a lot of ways. The 1920s started off really rough. 1920, 1921, 1922, major depression. We didn't call it that. We were just coming off the pandemic, the flu pandemic at that time. So very, very similar. And the 1920s reminds me a lot of today's AI era, where it's just this explosion of technology and possibility and just excitement around there. It was just so exciting, so full of possibilities. You get to the 1930s and really the wheels came off, and it was much more a psychological depression than it was an actual depression. And I couch that with, yes, we hit 25% unemployment for a very, very brief time. Very brief. Kind of 1932 to 1934 was the worst of it. The depression did not begin on October 30th, 1929. Most people didn't really...
That was Black Friday, right?
Black Friday, the day before, the 29th. No one really cared. Most people in middle America didn't really care. They should have. They really didn't. It took a while for that to materialize into something kind of bad. But we see very similar, we're just kind of accelerating some of that history now with a lot of that chaos and a lot of that counterproductive responses to what's going on. And I think the 1930s can be best described by constraint. That you had all this opportunity in the 1920s. In the 1930s, what did Warren Buffett say? You only know who's swimming naked when the tide goes out. And the tide went out in the 1930s. So you really got a sense to see, okay, who was out there in an unsustainable business model and something that wasn't going to make sense. And you needed to work with a lot less. And those constraints actually accelerated innovation because you didn't have, the same kind of boundless optimism. You had to make sure if someone was going to spend money on something, it had to be awesome. Not just like, hey, it's the latest thing. I'll pick up the new LLM tool or I'll pick up some new agent thing. It's got to actually do something that has real tangible value in the 1930s, which, those constraints made a big difference. Now, you get into the 1940s, and what I think is the most fascinating is how that culture of not only constraint and optimism, that kind of consumer culture and that innovation culture that was built, essentially won the war and won the peace afterwards. How does that actually turn into something that, not only can win the war, people forget what kind of a dark time it was that, really the United States was up against the Third Reich and the Japanese Empire at the same time. And there was no other, Britain was not in a great position to help. Not to say that they weren't, but they were overstretched and in a lot of trouble. The United States was essentially fighting most of that on its own. People say, well, how about the Eastern Front? How about the Russians? Absolutely. Had we not supplied them and fed them, they would have crumbled. There's no real doubt about that. So when I think about that, I see the 1940s as an era of triumph of innovation culture. That the United States had the innovation experience and chutzpah to be able to quickly innovate its way out of issues. People forget that at the beginning of the war, the German panzer divisions were much better. The Japanese Zero fighter planes, much better. Aircraft carriers, much better. All of their war machines were much better than ours. Within 2 to 3 years, the United States had better equipment, better leadership, better personnel, better logistics than any of them did. Think about that for a second. 2 to 3 years. We out-innovated the rest of the world in a few years to win the war. That's a cool story. We could not have done that without the sort of innovation culture that was born in the 20s and 30s. That's how we knew how to do it. And it's interesting when you look at our competitors on the world stage at that time, not only the Germans, the Japanese, but the British, French, Russians, Chinese, not even close at that time. And that's what I think the real theme of the book on the 1940s is going to be, is really that triumph of innovation culture where we put all of those lessons to work to fight the war and win the peace.
With the remaining time we have, I want to quickly highlight some of if we almost do like a drive-by version of some of the micro stories that you unpack in the book. Now, I actually want to go into the actual title of the book, because I can promise 100 out of 100 people prior to your book are not associating Bullfrogs or bingo, maybe The Little House on the Prairie, if you know when it came out, which I didn't. But they're not associating those things with the Great Depression. So can we kind of just quickly cover what's the story behind each of those things, starting with, let's start with Bullfrogs. Like, what did they have to do with this time period?
Yeah, lightning round on the title. Bullfrogs refer to bullfrog farming, basically the get-rich-quick scheme of the 1930s. What was really different, people might remember in the 1920s, you had the Ponzi schemes, where it was all kind of this house of cards. And it was like, hey, get rich quick. I don't have to do anything. I'm just going to become rich overnight. Bullfrogs, the whole pitch, it was still a scheme, but the pitch was really different. You had to work your butt off in order to make this happen, because raising bullfrogs is not easy. But if you did it, you could sell all of your frogs to this guy, Albert Broll, who would can them and to meet the unlimited demand for frog legs in the world. You can probably see the faults with the business model, and anyone who's got a farming background knows exactly what the problem is raising bullfrogs. But it's a great story. It's an interesting kind of allegory on kind of consumer culture that we want to take control of our own destiny. Both a Ponzi scheme and Bullfrogs scheme was kind of the same underlying idea. But it tells something about the Great Depression, that people were willing to work for it. And that the same pitch, the great get-rich-quick Ponzi schemes wouldn't work in the 1930s. What worked was actually working hard. That was really the zeitgeist of the era. Much more to that story. It's a great story. It is funny as hell. It's a really good one. Bingo was sort of the same idea. Most people who have ever played bingo, maybe like I did, in a Catholic church basement with their grandmother on Friday night. And people sort of forget that it was Catholic churches in the Great Depression who had to figure out a way to earn money, bring the community together, and kind of continue their mission. It's, hey, during the Great Depression, donations were way down, but people still wanted to have fun, come together, play a game, but it couldn't be gambling. It couldn't be, there's some restrictions there. So it was some priests in Pennsylvania and a Jewish immigrant who kind of brought the game over from Europe, who figured out a way to make church basement bingo a thing. And it's still a thing. I mean, it's become a huge thing. It's like $10-12 billion a year right now. But you can still play, you go to your local Catholic church, and you can still play church basement bingo pretty much every Friday or Saturday night now. Again, came from there. And many people kind of have read Little House on the Prairie. Maybe they watched the TV show. Michael Landon, if memory serves, Laura Ingalls Wilder, the whole deal. Great TV show in the 70s and 80s. Most people don't quite realize. People think like, hey, everyone in the 1930s was all FDR all the time, kind of these, like, hey, we're the social safety net, the FHA, the CCC, all of that. Laura Ingalls Wilder and her daughter, by the way, wrote the Little House books as a counterpoint to that. They were the first libertarians, people who looked at that situation and said, I don't think the right answer is government intervention. It's actually grit, family, self-reliance, all of those sort of messages. And when you reread the books now with that, knowing that in mind, the message they were trying to convey, you realize that not everybody was on board with the FDR approach in the 1930s. That there's a real pushback to that. And our history books tend to kind of gloss over that. FDR was kind of this savior figure who kind of led us through the 1930s. And we really forget that the conservative movement, the libertarian movement were born of that era as well. And
that was as a response to his policies?
Huge response to his policies. And what we see today, this kind of right-wing, left-wing sort of archetype that we have in the United States dates back to that era. And we only tend to look at one side of that story, but the Wilders wrote the other side as a children's book. And their idea was real simple. We want to influence kids. That was absolutely their goal. So it was a fascinating story of a mother-daughter collaboration and kind of the birth of a political movement.
Wow. Today, you talked about like the parallels with today and the breakthrough innovation of the last 3-4 years has been generative AI, starting with ChatGPT, to the extent that it's permeated everyone, right? Was there anything in the 30s that was that, like, and I'll say this too, like, no one can say for sure where AI is going to go, but pretty much everyone is like, this is the next big thing. The next big thing is here, this culture changing technology. Was there any culture changing technology that like everyone was saying at that time, oh, this is the next big thing?
There were a lot of big things. I actually think that we today are excited about generative AI. A few years ago, we were excited about crypto. A few years before that, we were excited about IoT. We were excited about social. We were excited about the web. Frankly, as a historian, like the 1920s and 30s said, hold my beer. The amount of change that happened during those decades is so far beyond what's happening today that it isn't even really comparable. If I had to pick one thing that drove it all the way down, I'd say something really simple. You probably have one in your house right now. I bet you do. It's a refrigerator. Most people by the beginning of the 1930s, basically no one had one. By the end of the 1930s, almost everyone had one. And the reason they did was like, hey, it's an innovation born of necessity. I need to preserve food. If food is expensive or insecure, I'm going to do that. With ChatGPT, we're like, well, how can I make this job a little bit easier? How can I write a limerick, based on the new James Bond video game trailer? That's nice, but people need to eat, and some of those core needs. And a refrigerator costs the equivalent of $3,000 to $4,000 in today's money, yet people found a way to buy it during the Great Depression because it was it was a valuable enough innovation to actually put one in everybody's homes. The adoption rate, we look at adoption rates of generative AI technologies, great. They don't match anything about the level of sacrifice that people needed to make in order to put a refrigerator in their homes during the Great Depression, when they were scared out of their minds that they would not have a job tomorrow, or they would not have, we think about opportunity today, and that's great. People in the 1930s were scared out of their minds, yet they figured out a way to do it. Those are the lessons. That's where I think innovations like that are so much more telling than like, hey, I've got basically abundance. I can look at anything I want, anytime I want. What I really like to look at is, when do you have to make a choice, and what choice do you make? That's when you really know what's valuable. So I'm not saying that Gen AI isn't a big deal, not at all. But I am saying that there are bigger deals, and there have been bigger deals, and we would do well to learn about those.
That's a great place for us to hit our wrap up. So Jason, where can listeners find the book? Where can they learn more? Where can they find you?
I got a lot of things. So I'm gonna give your listeners some tasks, easy tasks. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm the only Jason Voiovich. I'm kind of like Tigger. I'm the only one. So you will find me on LinkedIn. I'm really easy to find. I would ask, please subscribe to Innovation History on Substack. I write there, and I push my thinking and these kind of ideas. I just launched a YouTube channel called Patents Past to Present, where I go through and I use patents as a sort of time machine to help us look back at where common things today came from. I think it's really cool, and I could use subscribers on that channel. So please, please, please go subscribe to that channel. The videos will improve, I promise. I am getting better. You can go buy my book on Amazon. It's really easy to find. It's the only title like that. It's a bestseller in history right now, bestseller in Depression era history, American history. So it should be pretty easy to find if you want to go there, paperback, ebook, or audiobook. But if you're an innovator, an entrepreneur, I have a different place for you. You can go to my website, repeathistory.com/book. You go there, and along with the book that you'll get actually cheaper than you get it on Amazon, I'll mail it to you, and then you'll get additional tools that I've developed to help you connect the dots between those stories and what you can do today. So a bunch of free tools. You can even buy up for a course on differentiation that I teach, or a course on prototyping and testing, all kind of born from those lessons. So repeathistory.com/book. I know we'll have all of those links in the show notes, but that's my pitch for that. So if you're an innovator, go get the book there, because you'll not only get the book, I'll mail it to you, I'll sign it for you, but you're going to get some extras that will help you make those lessons applicable for you right now.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that with our listeners. Who is one person, someone you know, who you want to give a shout out to, who's been helpful on your journey?
I am going to cheat, and I am going to shout out the people who inspired the book, who are my grandparents, the Depression era grandparents. In the introduction to the book, you learn about them, Vivian and John. And in the acknowledgments, I highlight Jose and Zoila from Cuba. So I have Midwestern grandparents and Havana grandparents. Those are the people who, through that kind of inspiring, entrepreneurial, gritty, joyous sort of perspective, really inspired. And they were looking over my shoulder, writing the whole book. And I dedicate that entire book to them. I miss them dearly. They were great, great people. And I think we could learn much more from them.
We will now give our top one or two lessons or takeaways for the listeners based on today's discussion. I'll go first, then I'll toss it up to you. Today's conversation was very much around the Great Depression and why it matters today. What I would like people to take away from this is something that it's a paraphrase of what you said earlier, but if you want to be truly innovative, study source material, not summaries. Jason, your go.
I love that. That's a great one. Be your own historian. Learn some of those skills. I think that's a great takeaway. I have two. I have my number one. Chaos brings opportunity. If you think things are chaotic and it's freaking you out a little bit, reframe that. That will create opportunity. It is creating a ton of opportunity right now. You just got to go out and get it. And then number two, constraints are your friend. The worst thing you can tell a creative person is give them a blank check and an open canvas. Constraints are critical. They will help really clarify your thinking and clarify your decisions. So look for an opportunity where there are strong constraints. It is a more fruitful one.
If you were listening to this and you had follow-up questions for Jason, you want to know more about the 1930s, you want to know more about innovation, you want to know about the mind of an innovator and how it might apply to your company today, you're in luck. Jason is doing an Ask Me Anything inside the Go-to-Market Club. That's our online founder and go-to-market leader community. The whole first week this episode is live. Jason will do a Reddit-style AMA where you just post a question for him, and he will, during the week, get back to you with his response. It's a great way to take the lessons from today and double down on them or get even more value out of the podcast. You can join if you're not a member already. Membership is free. Join at startuphypeman.com/GTM-club. That's startuphypeman.com/GTM-club. Now, my final question for you, Jason, is fill in the blank. And the last time you were on this show, your answer was joy. So fill in the blank. Entrepreneurship is blank.
I'm going to upgrade joy. I still think it's joy, and I'm going to upgrade it to enthusiasm. Here's why. Enthusiasm, the root words are Greek. They mean entheos, which means like God. Now, the Greeks had a bit of a different concept of God than we do. It's not like some bearded guy on the top of a chapel touching some other guy. Their concept of a God was more like a superhero, kind of like Superman, which actually was invented during the 1930s, which is a chapter in the book. So pitch for Superman. They represented the best of us. That's what the Greeks thought of. When you were enthusiastic, you were acting like the best of us. So when you innovate, you are acting in the image of God. That is a powerful lesson to take away. So when people say, oh, you're just enthusiastic. Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
I love it. He is Jason Voiovich. The book is Bullfrogs, Bingo, and the Little House on the Prairie, How Innovators of the Great Depression Made the Best of the Worst of Times. It is on sale now. Go check it out on Amazon or directly on his website. Jason, we will see you inside of the Ask Me Anything this first week. And thank you for being a guest today on the Go-to-Market Show.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. Get your questions queued up. Can't wait for it.
That'll put a bow on this one. Before we head out of here, a couple quick housekeeping items. Number one, did you like what you heard? Well, give us a subscribe and a follow. Maybe share it with one friend who you think would find this valuable. Number two, remember that Ask Me Anything I told you about at the end of the episode? That goes down exclusively inside of Go-to-Market Club, our online founder and startup community. And you can access it for free. Membership is 100% free at startuphypeman.com/GTM-club. Number three, need pitch help? Startup Hype Man is your man. Whether it's a fundraising narrative or a go-to-market or category narrative, we've got you covered to make sure you have messaging that doesn't help you just go to market, but of course what? Helps you become the GOAT to market. All right, we will see you next week here on the GOAT to Market Show. Thank you for listening. And remember, why be a unicorn when you can be the GOAT?